everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be showcasing the new Charlotte Tilbury bronzers and the new Desert Haze palette. So she just launched a new bronzer that has 4 shades and I am so excited about it. But she also launched a new quad with the bronzers. This is the Desert Haze Quad. This retails for $53. It's currently available on the Charlotte Tilbury website. I'm assuming that this will probably be at Sephora at some point, but currently, right now, as it stands, it's only available at Charlotte Tilbury. You know, I picked up 2 shades in the bronzer. This is the shade Tan and this is the shade Deep. Now, this bronzer retails for $55, but the nice thing about this bronzer is that you can actually take out the inside and they're refillable. Once you buy the entire component for $55, you can actually buy refills and you just keep the component. The refills are $39 each. It comes in 4 different shades. So I bought the shade Tan and I also bought the shade Deep. I knew that shade Tan would be the best shade for me personally, but I wanted to also buy the shade Deep for those of you out there who have a darker skin tone than I do, that maybe you can see how it applies on a medium with like a golden undertone skin. In the description box down below, I will also leave a list of all the foundations that I wear and what shade I wear in those foundations. Just in case you're kind of curious about what shade might match you, I'm going to leave a list down there so that you know what matches me, you know what my shade is, and hopefully that will help you and guide you to buy the right shade. I was super excited about these bronzers because I absolutely love the Airbrush Flawless Finishing Powder. It's my favorite finishing powder. You guys hear me talk about it all the time. I love it right here in this area. It just blurs everything out. I always put it kind of in my T-zone. It just blurs everything. It's so finely milled. When I heard that this was the Airbrush Bronzer, I knew I needed to grab this. It was just inevitable. I love her powder. So I'm really excited to try out the new bronzers, let you guys know how I feel about them. So how I'm going to break this video down, we're going to jump right into the tutorial. I'm going to show you guys how I apply it. And then I'm going to go into the eyeshadow look using the Desert Haze palette. Then I will go through swatches. I'm going to swatch this palette next to several palettes that I have in my collection. For those of you out there that might have the palettes that I compared it to, I did find several shades in my collection that are very similar to this in one palette. So during the swatching section, I will get into those palettes. I will also swatch the bronzers next to several other bronzers that I have in my collection. So once we get through the swatches, then I will jump into my full final thoughts on how I feel about both products and if I feel like they are worth picking up. These are higher price point products. As we know, Charlotte Tilbury is a high-end brand. In the description box down below, I will also leave timestamps. So for those of you that maybe want to just skip ahead to the parts that you're interested in, that will be a nice, easy guide for you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the actual applications of the Desert Haze palette and the 2 bronzers, and then we'll get into the swatches, and I will see you guys all in my final thoughts. So this is a huge box. It's big. And, you know, I noticed right away that these were much larger than the powder, and they really are. This is a huge bronzer. So you guys know how big the Marc Jacobs Tantastic bronzer is. So this is what it looks like next to it. It's just about as big as the Marc Jacobs Tantastic bronzers. This is what it looks like with the powder. So it's much larger. So my plan was I wanted to put this shade, the shade that I bought for myself, on one side, and then I'm going to put Deep on the other, just so that you guys can see what it looks like on my skin tone. I'm going to take my Sonia G Face Pro. I'm going to go into the shade Tan. Okay, so this is a very buildable bronzer. So I'm going in with very light strokes, kind of just buffing it into my skin. And it looks dark in the pan, but it's very buildable. I was afraid I was gonna get too much pigment because when I opened it, I was like, oh crap, that might be a little bit too dark for me. But it actually blends really good. This is a great bronzer. Put some down the neck. I always put bronzer on my neck because you guys know that when you tan and stuff, like, you know, when you're outside in the sun, your neck just never gets tan. And so I always add a little bit of bronzer on the neck. The only thing I have on is foundation, concealer, and my brows done. That's it. I love this bronzer. It's so smooth. And it does like give the airbrushed effect. It has a very smooth like texture to it. And oh my gosh, this is exciting. Okay, I'm gonna go into the shade Deep. Even though this is just not the right color for me, my gosh, does this bronzer blend into the skin. Oh my gosh. Charlotte, this is amazing. The thing about it is that if you love the powder like I do, I think you will love the bronzer. This is a beautiful bronzer. Holy smokes, this is a pretty bronzer. Let's go ahead and jump into the eye makeup, and then we'll get into the swatches, the comparisons, and all of that, and then I will jump into my final thoughts. Okay, I got you guys all zoomed in. Let's go ahead and jump into this palette. Recently, I picked up an eyeliner from Pat McGrath, and these are really, really good, like long-lasting waterline eyeliners. I've been really impressed with the pigment. I'm gonna take this and go up on my upper waterline with it. I'm gonna take a thin line of this right on the base of my lashes. And then I'm gonna take a brush and just blend that out. Now we're gonna go into the palette. I'm gonna take this really light cream shade and I'm going to place that on the lid. It kind of has a little bit of a peachy tone to it. Looks really pretty. Okay, we'll go back in and add more as we go. So the first color I'm gonna go into is this light shade right up here. And I'm gonna bring that, oh, and it's pigmented too. Her mattes are pretty pigmented, so I'm gonna wipe my brush off. And it blends out good. That's the nice thing, is that her mattes are pigmented, but they do blend out. They're very, very soft mattes. Before I move on to the next color, when you're working with mattes, you are basically stacking the matte shades on top of themselves. You never want to move on to the darker shades until you get that transition shade exactly where you want it, because basically you're kind of stacking them. And as you stack, you want to continue to blend, and you want to blend each shade that you pick up to the point where it's completely blended out. So I'm just going to softly sweep this under here. I'm gonna move on to this shade right below it. It's got the same tone, but it's just a darker shade. And I'm focusing this right on the bone of my crease and kind of carving out my crease with this shade. Notice that I've got the brush down here in front of my face. Before I was kind of like out here doing this because I was bringing the shadow out, but now I'm keeping it into the crease only. So I'm keeping the brush pretty much like almost directly in front of my eye. You know what I always like about her mattes too is that they have a shine to them. As you can see, they're not like a dusty, dirty matte. It's kind of the perfect shadow to do an all matte eye. I'm gonna take a small brush and use that shade on the lower lash line. I'm gonna take that shade with my Rephr number 2 brush. I'm gonna place this right here on the outer corner, creating a little bit of that dimension here. I'm gonna blend that into my crease. Now I'm gonna go into the dark shade So I'm going to take my small pencil brush from Rephr. This is the number 3. This will just add a little bit more dimension. So now taking this brush with no extra product on it, and I'm just gonna kind of buff and blend those together. Next, I'm gonna grab this shade right up here at the top. I'm gonna go right directly in the center of the look with this shade. Shades stack on top of themselves very good, and I'm not getting any fallout either. Like, that's one thing that I love about her mattes. Okay, going back in one more time with that light shade that we first went on the lid with, and placing that right there and kind of bringing that color back to life. When you're adding all of those shades and you're putting it on, you always, if you want the lid to pop, you always have to go back in with the first shade that you use. You just want to make sure that that lid comes back to life. I'm going to mix between these two shades right here. Softly darken this up just a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the swatches, and let's start with the bronzers first, just so we can kind of get those out of the way. So up here on the screen are the bronzers next to several bronzers that I have in my collection. I first wanted to compare it to the Film Star Bronze and Glow in the Fair Medium. That is Charlotte Tilbury's actual bronzer. It has a bronzer and a highlighter in one palette. And the Fair Medium, you can tell, is very light, and that's the reason why I really don't use that bronzer a lot, only because the shade doesn't really match me. And we have the Airbrush Bronzer in Tan, and then the Airbrush Bronzer in Deep. But then I also compared it to the Marc Jacobs Tantastic, and as you can see, the Tantastic is almost the exact same shade as the Film Star Bronze and Glow in Fair Medium. I don't feel like it's dark enough for me and what I want in a bronzer. And then at the end, we have the Fenty Bronzer in Beijing Guile. That shade is very similar to the Airbrush Bronzer in Tan. I also swatched it in under a flash, so you could actually see the undertones. Sometimes when you take a picture with a flash, it's really easy to see undertones in certain shades, just so that you guys could see what the shade Deep actually looks like. And it's kind of a very cool tone, rich brown. It's a very beautiful shade. It also has a tiny bit of a red to it, and it's a very unique shade. So then I compared it to my Tom Ford Shade and Illuminate. You guys know that I recently bought this cream contour, and I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. But I have Intensity 1 and I have Intensity 2. When I was applying the bronzers, it kind of made me feel like I was applying these two. Up here on the screen are images of the Airbrush Bronzer next to the Tom Ford Shade and Illuminate in Intensity 1 and 2. It's mind-blowing how similar they are. The only difference is I feel like the shade Deep in the Airbrush Bronzer from Charlotte Tilbury is a little bit more cool toned than the Intensity 2 from Tom Ford, but they're definitely very similar. So those are the swatches of the bronzers. Let's go ahead and move on to the swatches of the Desert Haze palette. First compared it to the KKW Beauty and Mario collaboration, the Artist and Muse palette. Those two shades were very similar. The Glam King from KKW Beauty and the Enhanced shade in this Desert Haze were very similar. The I Am Inspired from KKW Beauty and the Smoke shade from the Charlotte Tilbury palette were almost identical. It literally is almost the exact same shade. So I kind of personally feel like if you have the Artist and Muse palette, this one from KKW Beauty, you really necessarily don't need this palette. They're very similar. You kind of have the shades here, and you don't have this dark shade, but you could pull this from many palettes to get this palette. So if you have the Artisan Muse palette, I don't know that I would get the Desert Haze. That's just my personal opinion. Unless you're obsessed with Charlotte Tilbury like I am, then, you know, buy as you will. The next palette that I wanted to compare it to is the Dominique Cosmetics Latte palette. You know, this first row is very similar to the Desert Haze palette. So when I first saw this, I was like, oh my gosh, they look like the exact same palette. Up here on the screen, you will see the swatches, and they are very similar. Yes, Pumpkin Spice from the Latte palette is a little bit warmer than the enhanced shade in the Desert Haze palette, but they're very similar. And I think once you apply them on the eye, I don't necessarily think that you will notice that much of a difference. So you always have to keep that in mind when you're comparing palettes and you're comparing swatches. Yes, when you swatch it, it might look a little bit different, or the tone might be a little bit off, but when it goes on the eye, it doesn't really, it's going to probably be the same. You could probably create the exact same look using the Latte palette as you would with the Desert Haze. And I also really like the Latte palette. I think the Latte palette has really good soft pigments. Next up, I compared it to the Anastasia Soft Glam palette. This one was also very similar. Obviously, the enhanced shade from the Charlotte Tilbury palette is much more warmer, kind of that pumpkin-y type of color. Next to Burnt Orange from ABH. It's very similar to the shade Sienna in the ABH palette. Cypress Umber and Define are very similar as well. So truthfully, if you have the ABH palette, I don't necessarily think that you need to run out and grab the Desert Haze. Again, unless you just love Charlotte Tilbury like I do, you kind of have this palette already if you have the Soft Glam palette. Then I wanted to compare it to the Instant Pillow Talk palette. This is one of the newest palettes from Charlotte Tilbury. And I spoke about this palette in my ranking my Charlotte Tilbury palettes video. And the reason why I really loved this palette is there was so many mattes in this palette. When it comes to Charlotte Tilbury's quads, or even some of her larger palettes, you don't get as many mattes. And so having all these mattes in this palette was really good for me in my collection when it comes to just Charlotte Tilbury alone. But when I first saw the Desert Haze palette, it reminded me of this section right here, which is the date night section. Up here on the screen, you will see they are very, very similar. The only thing that you are missing is that really dark defined shade. So the rest of the shades, I'm here to tell you, are very similar. If I used Desert Haze on my left eye and I used the Pillow Talk on the right, you would not know the difference. So that's it for the swatching portion of the video. Let's go ahead and jump into my final thoughts. Okay, everyone, let me go ahead and get into my final thoughts. I'm going to first start with the palette. As you saw in the swatches, and again, I repeat myself, if you have the Instant Pillow Talk palette, this section in the date night is so similar to this Desert Haze palette that you truly don't need it. Honestly, because yes, you don't have this dark shade right here, but I guarantee you, you have this dark shade somewhere in your collection. Same goes for the Soft Glam, same situation for the Dominique Cosmetics, same thing with the Artisan Muse. The palettes that I compared, those shades are so similar that if you have those palettes, you really necessarily don't need this palette in your collection. Depending on what you have in your collection, you can decide from there if you need this palette. It performs just like any other Charlotte Tilbury palette out on the market, so I would not say that it's any different of a formula. The formula is fantastic, but I really hope that the swatches were helpful for you to see if this is a palette that you need to run out and grab and introduce into your collection. Let's move on to the bronzers. Oh my gosh, I am obsessed. These bronzers are fantastic. Just well done, well done, well done. They are beautiful. They brush onto the skin so soft. They're so finely milled, just like the Airbrush powder, that they don't get muddy. And it's almost like they blend themselves. Fantastic bronzers. Just mind-blowing how amazing the formula is. And when you compare it to the Film Star Bronze and Glow, I feel like the Film Star is a little bit softer of a formula than the one in the Airbrush. I feel like the Marc Jacobs, the formula in the Marc Jacobs is almost the exact same as the Charlotte Tilbury Bronze and Glow. It's almost like they have the same texture, but I feel like with the Airbrush bronzer, it's soft, but it's also very finely milled. So it applies, I think, even better than the Film Star Bronze and Glow. That's just me personally. But let's just say that you already have the Film Star Bronze and Glow and you love it and you're using it. I wouldn't run out and grab this bronzer until you've used up this bronzer. I feel like, you know, you probably don't need both of them. Personally, you might not need both of them because they both apply really well. But if you're in the market for a new bronzer, this is fabulous, you guys. Oh my gosh. So you guys know that the Fenty bronzer is my favorite. You can see I'm starting to get pan. I have used this bronzer so much. I have so much makeup, and for me to hit pan on something, that means I love it. This is a very soft formula as well. These are very soft in texture and the way that they apply on the skin, but I am shocked that the Airbrush bronzer even applies better than the Fenty. So I still love my Fenty. I do. I think it's a great formula, and if you have a perfect shade that you like in this bronzer, I don't necessarily think that you need to run out and grab the Airbrush. They are very similar in the way that they apply, but you get so much more product for your money. The Charlotte Tilbury bronzers are $3.44 per gram. The Fenty Beauty is $4.82 per gram. You are saving over $1 per gram by buying the Charlotte Tilbury than the Fenty Beauty. And when you add it all up, you're going to be able to buy refills for this at $39 a pop because you've already bought the component. You're getting a way better deal when you buy the Charlotte Tilbury bronzer. She put a lot of product in this bronzer, and to know that the component, you know, once you buy it, and then you just have to buy refills. I like the idea of the refills because too many times we're paying so much money for fancy packaging, and it's a lot of waste. It's a lot of waste of packaging. And so the fact that you can buy refills to go into these bronzers is genius, but the fact that it saves you money and saves the landfills and saves the world, then it's also even better. And you almost don't even have to kind of buff it. It just kind of buffs itself. It's literally like applying the powder in a dark shade. It melts. It's just flawless. You get the pigment and you also get the powder, and it's like a 2-for-1. It's fantastic, you guys. This might be my new favorite Charlotte Tilbury product because it's just genius to take that formula and create a bronzer with it. And you know, if you guys are in the market to buy a new matte bronzer, this is stunning. So beautiful. I hope that this video was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. If any of you out there have bought the Airbrush bronzer, let us know in the comments down below how you're liking it, because I'm just one person sitting in front of a camera. Your guys' opinion means just as much as mine does, even if not more. And you guys are so helpful in the comments. So let us know how you're feeling. Do you like it, or is it not working for you? Your input means just as much as my input. So please share with us your experience in the comments down below. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for spending your day with me. I love you all so, so much. And I will see you guys all in my next video. Love you. Bye.